dark. Red and blue views, truth in the middle. No script, just thought raw and a little civil. Every question's got layers, so we peel back facts. From the real to the surreal, we don't hold back. Voices collide where ideas ignite. You tuned in, now step into the fight. This is more than talk, this is thought that counts. Welcome to the feed where the signal mounts.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're your shortcut to getting, well, truly well-informed.
That's right.
Each deep dive is really custom tailored for you, pulling out the most important nuggets of knowledge from some pretty diverse sources.
And today's source is definitely unique.
Oh, yeah. Today, we're diving into material from an online platform, OTW Live. And it's really anything but typical. Our mission, really, for this deep dive is to unpack these raw, unfiltered insights. Stuff that challenges the norm.
Definitely challenges the norm.
We're covering everything from, radical personal philosophies, critiques of fundamental systems. Big systems, all the way to some pretty thought-provoking theories about technology and just candid observations on human behavior.
And what really stands out right away is just the breadth of it and how raw, how unedited the content is.
Yeah.
We're going to be exploring discussions that are really direct, often quite provocative. They offer a glimpse into viewpoints you probably won't encounter in, say, mainstream discourse.
Right.
So prepare to maybe reconsider some fundamental assumptions from a very different angle.
Okay, let's start with that angle. The self-branding. That's the first thing that hits you, isn't it? This source material has this highly assertive, almost defiant identity.
Oh, absolutely.
Right from the start, you hear phrases like, this ain't a stream. This is a cosmic event.
Right, or that uncut flame.
Exactly. It's a clear declaration. They're setting themselves up as something, well, extraordinary.
Indeed. The channel deliberately positions itself as impactful, transformative. They call themselves a broadcast run through the solar glare, and they emphasize impact and intent over just like views.
And the views aren't the point.
No.
Yeah.
It's a declaration of authenticity, of power, and it's all kind of encapsulated in their mantra. Be real, be raw, be rare.
Be real, be raw, be rare.
Yeah. I think the underlying insight there is really the source's commitment to this kind of radical authenticity. They're not just trying to inform, they want to provoke, to redefine what broadcasting even means.
And it gets even more interesting because this self-proclaimed, out-of-this-world entity, they talk about breaking norms, right? Shaking whole lanes, taking the throne. It's almost like the channel itself is a persona, and they even have a song titled, You Built a Monster. How does that track fit in?
Well, that title, You Built a Monster.
Yeah.
That really serves as a core identity piece for this entity.
Okay.
The lyrics, things like, taught myself to hunt without a trace, or stood alone, no gimmicks, now the throne got my imprint in it.
Right.
And you didn't break me, you built me, I was always here, now you just see it. It all suggests this philosophy of like radical self-reliance, transformation.
Just forged by adversity.
Exactly. Forged by adversity, now asserting its power, claiming its place. It really embodies this non-compliant, self-made kind of strength.
Right.
That's the insight, I think.
Okay. So beyond the, let's say, aggressive branding, the source then shifts to challenging established systems, and it starts with a really stark assessment of the medical industry. Paints a very bleak picture.
It certainly does, yeah. The perspective they offer, they call it a chunky system dressed in loss.
Wow.
Where symptoms treated, never the cause. That's the direct quote.
Never the cause.
Yeah. The core argument is that bills for profit make you crawl. That the industry is driven by gold-plated lies and doctors bought with greasy smiles. And it ultimately concludes pretty bluntly, this ain't medicine, it's a business plan.
So the insight is just a complete rejection of mainstream healthcare.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Viewing it not as a healing system, but as this predatory business designed for profit, not cure.
That's a bold accusation. And the critique doesn't stop there, right? It goes deeper into the legal and governmental systems. What's the core claim they're making about government and citizenship? It sounds pretty unconventional.
It is highly unconventional, but the source claims that the United States citizen is considered a business entity.
A business entity.
Yeah, and that the United States itself is considered a business entity corporation. The implication is that people, you, are being duped out of your original power and position by what they call lawful government, all but defunct.
All but defunct.
Right. So the insight here is this fundamental argument that the entire legal framework, as they see it, operates on this kind of hidden commercial basis,
Right.
effectively turning individuals into corporate entities, stripping them of their inherent, sovereign rights.
That's a really radical interpretation of the whole system. Now, the expert in the source material, they make a point of distinguishing their approach from someone like Alex Jones. How do they draw that line?
Right. They emphasize having an on-the-ground component, achieving actual results in court, but, and this is key, without hiring attorneys,
Okay.
by, quote, standing for what's true and correct. And they directly contrast this with Alex Jones, who they dismiss as a controlled opposition.
Ah.
They even point to Jones's own legal struggles, like losing a case with an attorney, as a kind of counterexample, to highlight their own direct, non-compliant approach.
So the claim is their method is more authentic, more effective.
That's the claim.
Yeah.
Yeah. Believing in a superior method of legal engagement that bypasses traditional lawyers and claiming it works better because it directly challenges the system's authority.
Okay, you mentioned results in court without attorneys. Does the source get specific about how they do that, particularly around this concept of jurisdiction?
They do. They detail a strategy centered on personal jurisdiction.
Right.
The court's power over a defendant.
Right, usually established by serving papers, showing up in court.
Exactly. But the expert claims to avoid this. They talk about making a special appearance through the proper registered agent service of process.
Which means?
Essentially filing specific documents, often via the Postal Service, to challenge the court's authority over them personally instead of physically showing up.
Okay.
They assert that a United States citizen is just a record, like an entity identified by vital records, social security number, that kind of thing.
Not the actual living person.
That's the argument. You are not the United States citizen. That is a record. That's the quote. So they choose to expose their record, deal with it that way, maybe make the payment for this debtor entity rather than appearing themselves.
So the insight is a kind of radical reinterpretation of legal rules.
Exactly. Suggesting that if you understand these, let's be honest, often obscure rules, you can potentially sidestep conventional legal liabilities by separating your living self from this legal record, or straw man, as some call it.
So if the U.S. citizen is just a record and they claim to handle payments for this debtor entity, what are the practical consequences they claim this strategy has? How does it redefine accountability? And what about the lawyers, the judges?
Well, the idea is that by challenging this personal jurisdiction, by separating from the record, they aim to shift liability away from the individual.
Shift it where?
Back to the state, presumably. They also cite American jurisprudence, that's AmJur, asserting a lawyer's first duty is to the court, not to the client.
Implying a conflict of interest.
Right, for individuals seeking representation. And they even posit that attorneys can only really be hired by a board of directors, not individuals, again, emphasizing this corporate structure within the legal system.
Wow.
So the expert strategy involves understanding territorial jurisdiction. I phrase this as, I am in this world, not of this world, kind of suggesting non-recognition of the court's physical domain.
Okay.
Understanding subject matter jurisdiction, referencing in beginning was the word, which seems to imply a challenge to the legal language itself. And seeing the person as this record that's liable. The goal is to shift that liability.
So the deeper insight is, if you master these complex, maybe hidden legal distinctions,
And actively disassociate from the legal person or record.
you can potentially detach yourself from the whole system's authority and liabilities.
That's the core belief they're putting forward. Yeah, a profound belief in that possibility.
Yeah. That's a fascinating, definitely unconventional way to look at the legal system.
Huh.
So for someone listening, wanting to navigate things from this perspective, what's the bottom line advice from the source?
The advice is basically adjudicate outside of court and fundamentally stay out of court if you can,
Avoid it altogether.
if possible. They also clarify roles.
Yeah.
The jury is the fact finder. They decide what happened. The judge is the determinant of law. They apply the rules,
Okay.
and they highlight standing as crucial, proving you have a legitimate stake in the case. Apparently, most federal cases get dismissed for lack of it.
So the overall message is one of radical self-empowerment.
Yes, through understanding and, I guess, exploiting perceived weaknesses in the system, urging a proactive, non-compliant stance.
Okay. So from challenging present-day systems, the source then takes this pretty big leap. It projects its critique into the future with some mind-bending theories on nanotechnology and biohacking.
Yeah, this is where things get really speculative, maybe challenging.
Crossing into sci-fi territory. Or maybe science fact, depending on who you ask.
Right. It proposes this really fascinating interplay between technology and biology.
Oh, so?
It suggests nanoparticles are designed to interact with our biological bodies, which, they say, contain liquid and solid crystals.
Okay, crystals.
Yeah. And the really unique idea is that you could potentially biohack the nanotechnology in his own body.
Biohack the nanotech.
Maybe using your own body's electromagnetic pulse to, quote, dismiss the nanoparticles, or even use them for your own benefit. They frame the human body as an alchemical battery, capable of transforming elements, meaning they believe the body has this inherent, almost magical ability to transmute or neutralize foreign stuff using its own energy.
And they connect this to alkalinity.
Yeah, highlighting the importance of maintaining proper alkalinity levels for this process. So the key insight is this speculative vision of individuals regaining control over technologically altered biology, turning a threat into a tool through, like, bioenergetic mastery.
That's a powerful idea, personal biological agency. But if this tech is supposedly so pervasive, how do they connect it to our minds, our thoughts?
They address that directly, warning that nanotechnology, quote, will try to invade your thoughts.
Invade your thoughts.
Yeah, so they stress self-knowledge, meditation, personal healing as defenses.
Okay.
And they delve into the subconscious mind, explaining it operates under symbolism, not language.
Symbolism, not words.
Right. They argue that because the subconscious processes images, feelings more directly, it allows for reprogramming through positive affirmations, even things like emojis.
Emojis. Seriously.
Apparently.
Yeah.
They suggest emojis act as these potent symbols that can bypass conscious thought and embed new programming directly into the subconscious.
So the insight is mental fortitude, self-mastery. That's the ultimate defense against this tech manipulation.
Essentially, yes. And it suggests a pathway to conscious self-reprogramming as well, mastering your own mind.
That's a remarkable theory about symbolism and the subconscious. What are the broader societal implications they suggest if this kind of control over language and thought is, really happening?
Well, the underlying implication is pretty stark. If you control the language, you control everything.
Control the language, control everything.
Yeah. And they tie this to a larger desensitization agenda, pushed forward by media, video games, music, movies.
Oh.
They describe it as using blood gore guts to achieve this desensitization effect. So it suggests this deliberate societal conditioning through media.
Aimed at eroding empathy, critical thought.
That seems to be the implication. Saturating the public with violent or disturbing imagery to numb them.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Moving to another dimension of their critique, the sources also have some really candid observations on just society, human behavior, often highlighting what feels like a growing detachment, maybe even cruelty.
Yeah, this section gets into some controversial territory like hate speech.
Okay, what's their take?
The argument presented is that the actual word itself does not cause harm.
The word itself causes no harm.
Right. And that regulating speech is a slippery slope, that it could lead to widespread censorship. They cite examples. Canada, Australia, mentioning arrests for speech offenses, prisoners facing extreme measures.
Suggesting a trend towards
A social credit score system. That's the fear. So the insight here is this deep distrust of speech regulation, viewing it as dangerous, a precursor to broader control, like a dystopian social credit system, a threat to liberty.
That's a pretty stark warning. There was one anecdote in particular that seemed to capture this perceived societal shift they're talking about. The story about the possum.
Yeah, that anecdote really tries to encapsulate this perceived desensitization. The images of a possum shaking on the ground in front of a gas station.
Right, and people were
Pulling out cameras, filming it, not helping. It's presented as this stark example of the bystander effect.
just watch it.
Yeah. And even though the expert in the source says they informed the clerk, the real critique is aimed at the collective indifference. The general attitude of, and this is a direct quote, no one cares anymore. It reflects this profound belief that society has become, in their words, fucked up. a real disillusionment.
So the insight is a lament for lost empathy, lost compassion.
I think so, yeah. A perceived erosion where just observing has replaced actually intervening or helping.
That possum story, it's quite heartbreaking, really. Makes you wonder what else goes unnoticed. These observations paint a pretty grim picture. But how does the source ultimately frame human nature in all this, especially with their emphasis on individual empowerment?
Well, it's interesting. They distinguish animals as more predictable than humans, who they portray as potentially conniving.
Okay.
But despite that, the expert reaffirms a golden rule. Treat other people or animals or any being in this realm better than you would ever expect to be treated back.
So there's still an ideal there.
Yes, but it's tempered. Tempered by acknowledging bad eggs who ruin the whole nest. They also touch on identifying scammers, looking for backup stories, charisma, trying to get contacts.
And they say being naive is...
The user's error. Basically your fault if you get scammed.
Right.
But ultimately, there's this really strong emphasis on building community, familying up, they call it, for self-sustainability. Instead of relying on these external systems, they distrust.
Self-reliance again.
Exactly. And it's symbolized by the idea that a true grower grows roots. So the profound insight, I think, is this call for radical self-reliance and community building as the antidote to this perceived societal decay. A return to basics, self-sufficiency, mutual support in a world they see as increasingly untrustworthy.
Wow, what a deep dive we have had today. Really covered a lot of ground.
We certainly did.
From that whole cosmic event idea of OTW Live, through its really complex challenges to legal and medical systems, into that intriguing world of biohacking mind control, and then these raw observations on human behavior, societal shifts. It's definitely a lot to unpack.
It is.
Hopefully, though, you found these unique nuggets of insight we talked about. And it's crucial, I think, to remember we're just unpacking the specific viewpoints from this source material, letting you understand its unique and often challenging philosophy.
Absolutely. And if there's an overriding message from these sources, it seems to be the critical importance of discerning information yourself, questioning assumptions, trying to understand the underlying mechanisms of the world around you.
Knowledge isn't passive.
Right. It's most valuable when it's understood, when it's applied. And personal responsibility in seeking that understanding seems paramount in their view.
So as you step back into your world after hearing all this, maybe you'll look at a news report differently, or a legal document, or even just, an interaction you see in a parking lot, maybe with a fresh set of discerning eyes. What new patterns will you start to recognize in the systems, the behaviors all around you? That's something to think about. Thank you for joining us for the deep dive.
Mic check, one voice, one spark. From the shadows to the bright, let's light the dark. Red and blue views, truth in the middle, no script, just thought raw and a little civil. Every question's got layers, so we peel back facts. From the real to the surreal, we don't hold back. Voices collide where ideas ignite. You tuned in, now step into